He had everything the world said would make him feel like something. And yet every morning, he woke up feeling like nothing. The money was there. The title was there. The respect of strangers was there. But something at the center of his life, the one thing that was supposed to hold all of it together, was gone. He did not know what was missing. That was the problem. And the ancient sages, the ones whose names have been almost entirely erased from history, they knew exactly why. They called it the problem of the branch. And 2,000 years ago, they wrote the solution in a single line. Before we go to the ancient sage, let us go to a man named Marcus. Marcus had spent 20 years building. First his career, then his reputation, then his marriage, then his social circle, then his net worth. Each thing built on top of the last, carefully, deliberately, with great sacrifice. And then, one Tuesday morning in November, without warning, the bottom stone moved. His company failed. That was the stone. And when it moved, the career, the status, the confidence, the marriage, the sense of self, they did not hold. They fell together. He had spent 15 years building something the world called success. But at night, alone, he could not remember why he had started. This is not a story about failure. Marcus had not failed by any measure the world uses. This is a story about a man who built everything and discovered that everything was built on nothing. He had built the company because his father had told him, without using words, that a man without a business is not a man. He had built the marriage because his culture told him that a man without a partner is incomplete. He had built the social circle because somewhere in his childhood, being alone had felt like punishment. He had built an entire life, but he had not built it from the root. He had built it from fear. Consider the letter A. In every language that descends from the ancient world, the first sound, the root of all words. Remove it, and language itself begins to unravel. An ancient Indian sage, writing 2,000 years before modern psychology, used exactly this image. He said, as the first letter is the root of all language, the primal source is the root of all existence. Not as poetry, as architecture, as a structural fact about how everything is built. He was not speaking about religion. He was speaking about structure, about the invisible thing that when present makes everything else possible, and when absent makes everything else collapse. And what Marcus had built, what most modern people build, had no such foundation. They had reached for the branches. They had skipped the root entirely. 6 months after the collapse, Marcus sat alone in a small room. Not the office, not the house, a room he had rented when everything else was gone. And for the first time in 20 years, he had nothing to do. And in that stillness, something surprising happened. He did not feel the relief he expected. He felt terror. The silence was not peaceful. It was accusatory. It asked him a question he had been running from for 20 years. Who are you when there is nothing left to be? This is the question the ancient sages built their entire system around. Modern life is specifically designed to make you skip the root. It is not accidental. Every system around you, school, career, social media, advertising, rewards branches. It celebrates what you produce, what you display, what you perform. It never asks what the root is. It never rewards you for tending to it. In fact, silence, stillness, and the slow, careful work of finding your own foundation are actively discouraged. They are called unproductive. They are called lazy. They are called self-indulgent. And so generation after generation builds upward, faster, taller, more impressive, on foundations that have never been examined. And generation after generation watches it fall when the wrong thing changes.
The sages saw this. They watched it in their own time. Kingdoms built on the hunger for power. Families built on the need for approval. Lives built on the avoidance of shame. And they wrote down what they saw in words that have survived 2,000 years.
Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist whose work shaped almost everything modern therapy is built on, spent 40 years studying why people's lives collapse in the exact same patterns, generation after generation. His answer was this: people build their identity from the outside in. They take on roles, titles, relationships, achievements, and they mistake the costume for the person wearing it. He called this the persona, the mask. And the tragedy, Jung said, is that the mask has no root. He said that beneath the persona, beneath all the roles and titles and performances, there is the self. Not the ego self, something deeper, something that does not need the mask. And the entire project of a meaningful life, Jung believed, was learning to build from that. The ancient Indian sage wrote the same thing 2,000 years earlier. He just wrote it in one line.
Viktor Frankl survived 3 Nazi concentration camps. When he was released, he had lost his wife, his family, his entire previous life. What he had left was a question, the same question Marcus sat with in his empty room. Frankl's discovery, which he spent the rest of his life writing about, was that the people who survived the unsurvivable were not the strongest or the most physically healthy. They were the ones who had a root, a meaning beneath all circumstances, something that could not be taken away by external events. He said, everything can be taken from a person, except one thing, the last of all human freedoms, the freedom to choose your response in any circumstance. That freedom, that root, nothing outside you can touch it. Marcus had no such root. When the company fell, everything fell, because the company had been the root, not a branch. And a person who cannot tell the difference between their root and their branches is living at the mercy of everything outside them.
Here is what makes this painful to truly understand. The branches feel like roots. That is the trap. Your job title feels permanent. Your reputation feels real. Your social circle feels solid. Your sense of self feels like bedrock. Until one morning, it does not. One morning you wake up and the title is gone, or the relationship is over, or the body has failed, or the person whose approval you spent 20 years earning has died, and the thing that was supposed to be bedrock simply is not there. The ancient sages watched this happen, in person, in the courts and markets and homes of their time. They watched powerful men collapse when power left them. They watched devoted people crumble when the object of their devotion was taken. And they understood something that modern psychology is only now putting language to. Identity collapse, what modern therapists call it, is not weakness. It is architecture. If you build your house on the branch and the branch breaks, the house falls. This is not a character flaw. It is a structural inevitability. And the sages said, there is only one cure.
And now, let us be honest with each other. This is not just the story of Marcus. If you are watching this, the odds are high that you have built something on a branch, perhaps many things. Your career, built on what? A need to prove something to a parent? A fear of being seen as ordinary? A desire for a level of security that comes from scarcity, not from genuine calling? Your relationships, built on what? A genuine root of who you are? Or on the need not to be alone, the need to be chosen, the need to feel that someone's presence validates your existence? The ancient sages did not ask you to tear it all down. They ask you to find the root first, and then, from that root, build again, differently, with permanence.
Modern neuroscience now has a name for what happens to the brain when the external anchors of identity are removed. It is called identity disruption, and brain scans show that it activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The brain does not distinguish. Loss of self and loss of a limb, same signal.
The ancient sage knew nothing of neural pathways, but he knew what he saw in the men and women around him. He watched people who had built on approval collapse when disapproval came. He watched people who had built on power crumble when power was taken. He watched the pattern over and over across an entire lifetime of observation. And then he sat down and wrote, choosing the image of the first letter, the root of all language, saying, there is something beneath your life the way a letter is beneath a word. Find it. Build from it. Everything else is secondary. 2,000 years ago, on a subcontinent that the Western world has largely ignored, in a language that most people alive today will never encounter, he wrote the cure, and it has been sitting there ever since.
An ancient Indian monk who lived more than 2,000 years ago in the southern reaches of the Indian subcontinent wrote 133 chapters on the human condition, on wealth, on love, on power, on virtue, on enemies, on death, on the interior life. He did not begin with wealth. He did not begin with power. He did not begin with love or discipline or the defeat of enemies. He began with one thing, the root. Because he understood, before you write a single word about how to build a life, you must first establish what everything is built on. He chose the image of the letter A, the first letter, the root of all language. And he said, what that letter is to every word ever spoken, the primal source is to everything that exists. The invisible thing present in all things, the foundation beneath all foundations. He was not asking you to be religious. He was asking you to be structural. He was saying, before you build anything, find the thing that cannot be taken. Find the source. Begin there. Begin only there.
What is your letter A? This is the question the sage is actually asking you. Strip away everything external. The job, the title, the relationships, the reputation, the money, the body, the history. What is left? What is the one thing that was there before all of it? What would remain if all of it were taken? For some people, the answer is nothing. That is not a catastrophe. That is a diagnosis. It means the work of your life, the real work, not the career work, has not yet begun. For others, the answer surfaces slowly. A sense of something. A quality that was present even in childhood, before the world told you who to be. A way of seeing. A way of caring. A capacity to bear difficulty that you always had but never called by name. The ancient sage called the primal source the root of the world. He was pointing at the same quality inside you. The thing in you that predates your resume. The thing that will survive every collapse. The thing you will rebuild from every time because it cannot be destroyed.
Modern psychology arrived at this truth through decades of clinical research, thousands of hours of therapy, millions of pages of peer-reviewed study. The concept of self-concordant goals, goals that come from the genuine root rather than from external pressure, was formalized in research only in the 1990s. The ancient Indian monk wrote it in one couplet, 2 lines, approximately 12 words, 2,000 years before the research was published. He chose to place this teaching first, not in the middle, not as a footnote, first, because everything else he wrote, every teaching about wealth, power, love, discipline, was built on this one understanding. Root before branch. Always, without exception. And if you think this wisdom belongs to another culture, another time, another world, consider this. You are using it right now. Every word you have understood in this video began with the same letter. The letter A. The first sound. The root of language. You have never had to think about it. It has simply been there, beneath everything, the way a foundation is beneath a building. This is what the sage wanted you to feel. Marcus sat in the small room for 3 weeks, not meditating. He did not know how to meditate. Not journaling. He had never done it. He simply sat
and waited and let the noise of 20 years slowly settle like silt in still water. On the 22nd day, something surfaced. Not a plan, not a business idea, not a strategy, a memory. He was 11 years old. He had found a wounded bird in the garden and spent 4 days caring for it, feeding it, keeping it warm. And when it flew away, he had felt something he had no word for. Not pride, not reward, something quieter, something that needed nothing from outside.
That feeling, that capacity, that had been there before the company. It had been there before the marriage. It had been there before the approval of his father. It was his letter A, his root. It had never left. He had simply built on top of it, burying it, without knowing what he was standing on. He did not rebuild his company. He did not try to get back what he had lost. He built something smaller, slower, and rooted. A small organization that helped people in the kind of difficulty he now understood from the inside. It never made him rich again. It made him unbreakable.
Remember the man at the window, the city lights below. Everything the world said would make him feel like something. The feeling of nothing. That man and the man who planted the small rooted tree are the same man. The only thing that changed was the foundation. The branch-built life is not a moral failure. The ancient sages were not condemning it. They were diagnosing it. They were saying, we understand why you build on branches. The branches are easier to see. The roots require going down, going into the dark, sitting in the room with no agenda. That is the work. Not therapy, though therapy can help. Not meditation, though silence is part of it. Not productivity or optimization or self-improvement in any conventional sense. The work is finding the thing in you that has no price. The thing that exists independent of what anyone has told you you are. The ancient sage found his, and he chose, with that as his foundation, to write 1,330 teachings for the world. Every one of them built on this one understanding. Every one of them grew from this one root, as all words grow from the first letter.
The greatest empires in human history did not fall because of military defeat. Historians who study the pattern know that they fell first on the inside, when the root, the shared meaning, the unspoken foundation of what it meant to be that people, quietly disappeared. The armies came after. They came into a vacancy. This is true of empires. It is true of companies. It is true of marriages. It is true of individuals. The external collapse is always the last act. The root failure happened first, quietly, in the dark, long before anyone noticed anything was wrong. The sage who wrote this 2,000 years ago was not pessimistic. He was surgical. He was saying the answer is not complicated. It is not 100 things. It is one thing. Find the root. Tend the root. Build from the root. Everything else, wealth, love, discipline, power, he would teach you those too, but only after this. He wrote it first, and he meant it first. The root of the world, the root of the letter, the root of you. Find it. That is the beginning. That is the only beginning.
The ancient sage did not offer lists. He offered one line. And in that tradition, here is the one thing. Not 5 things, not a morning routine, one thing. Tomorrow morning, before your phone, before your coffee, before you speak to anyone, before you check anything, sit for 2 minutes, complete silence. Not meditation, not breathing exercises, just sitting. And ask yourself one question, out loud or in your mind. What is the actual root beneath everything I am building? Do not answer it immediately. The mind will give you an answer in the first 3 seconds that is made entirely of branches,
ambition, responsibility, obligation. Wait past that. Wait for the thing that speaks underneath the noise. It may not come today, it may not come this week, but the question, once asked, does not leave. It begins to work on you. The ancient sage did not give his greatest teaching at the end. He gave it first, before the chapter on wealth, before the chapter on love, before everything. Root before branch, always. Begin there.
Write it down. After the 2 minutes, whatever surfaced, however small, however uncertain, write it down. One sentence, not a paragraph, one sentence, beginning with the words, "The thing in me that cannot be taken is." Put it somewhere you will see it before you check your phone tomorrow. Not to motivate yourself, not as a positive affirmation, as an architectural reminder. This is the foundation. Everything I build today is built on this. The ancient sage wrote 133 chapters, but he knew, and he made sure you could not miss, that there was only one place to begin. Not chapter 50, not chapter 100, chapter 1. First line, first word, the root. You now know what Marcus did not know on the morning his company fell. You know what the sage understood 2,000 years ago. You know where to begin. The only question is whether you will.
The ancient sage wrote 133 chapters. This was the first. But the second chapter, the one that follows directly from this teaching about the root, contains something that most people in the modern world will find deeply uncomfortable. He called it the quality without which the root itself becomes hollow. Most people alive today are missing it entirely. And the sages said, with characteristic ruthlessness, that without this second quality, finding your root is only the beginning of a new kind of suffering. We will go there next, but only if you are ready for a teaching that does not comfort. The ancient sages were not in the business of comfort. They were in the business of truth. 2,000 years of forgotten wisdom. We have barely begun.